Welcome to Ridne Radio. My name is Dombrovska, and today I would like to introduce a very special guest of ours, Senator Kutcher. Senator Stanley Kutcher, welcome to Ridne Radio. It's a great pleasure to have a Canadian senator of Ukrainian descent as a guest.
Well, Привет, Anna, and thank you for having me be here. It's a privilege to be on your show.
Senator Kutcher, having been a senator for Canadian Parliament for the last 7 years, you've been witnessing a war inflicted on Ukraine by Russia, and especially with the last 3 years of full-scale invasion. How the full-scale phase of the war has impacted your work?
Well, first of all, thank you for pointing out that the war by Russia on Ukraine has not just been the last 3 years. I think that many people in the West don't realize how pernicious and sort of incremental the attacks that Putin has had directed against Ukraine have been. And I think part of that has led to complacency in the West. And Putin has seen this as Western weakness, and that has emboldened him. I also think that many in the West did not think that Ukraine would be able to resist the full-scale invasion that Putin had last February, 3 years ago. And the Ukrainian people, we should know that because we are Ukrainians, showed the world what Ukrainian people can do. And it has taken the world a long time to realize that we have to do much, much better to stop Russia's genocidal aggression on Ukraine. We're still not where we need to be. For me personally, I found out about the attacks. We were all worried about it because we were watching the television stories and the United States intelligence and all that from my family in Kyiv on WhatsApp. And so it was shocking, but not surprising. And from that point on, I must say that I got much, much more involved in my work in the Senate and in Canada's Parliament on things related to Ukraine and on things that Canada could do to help Ukraine.
I didn't know you had relatives in Kiev. I myself was born and raised in Kiev, so that's very dear to my heart and great to hear. I know we're close to the 3rd year anniversary of this full-scale invasion. There are some events prepared by the Ukrainian community of Ottawa. Tell us more about that. What would we have to be ready for in the end of February?
Well, I understand that there's an event for the general public on the 23rd of February in Ottawa. On the 24th of February, Senator Donna Dasko and I are hosting a very special event in the Senate of Canada to address the 3rd anniversary of this genocidal war and to focus on the resilience of the Canadian people and to focus on what we need to do to help children survive this conflict and after the conflict. People, because of my background is mental health, I'm a professor of psychiatry, ask me what should we be doing to help children in Ukraine with their mental health. And I said the number one thing we need to be doing is to stop this war with the Ukrainian victory. After that, we can get down to the other things that we need to do, but that is the most important thing. You know, in the Senate, I have been doing things to promote Canada's support for Ukraine. For example, I brought in the Ukrainian Heritage Month bill, which passed in the Senate. Unfortunately, was in the House when the prorogation happened, so we'll have to start it again. I started the Senate disinformation study on Russian disinformation and its impact in Canada. I've been involved in the work on seizing Russian assets and repurposing the Russian assets for use in Ukraine. I've been very, very strongly promoting Canada's investment in the Danish model for the development of the Ukraine's own armaments industry, because Ukraine has been betrayed by the West many times. And so Ukraine has to build up its own capacity to defend itself. And one of the good ways to do that is to flow money through Denmark into the Ukrainian armaments industry. And I've been pushing and pushing for that. And I'm very, very, very pleased that Minister Blair announced that recently as well, and been very involved in the free trade agreement discussions. So to promote the free trade agreement between Canada and the United States. So it's been a busy time. I'm proud of what Canada has done. I think we could have done much better. I think there's still room to improve dramatically for us.
That's impressive. And you're a member of Canada-Ukraine Parliamentary Friendship Group. Could you share your forecast for Canadian military support of Ukraine? How it will change following the new U.S. president policy?
Well, the challenges with Mr. Trump is that he's completely unpredictable. We don't know what he is doing to just confuse us to what he's really doing. He's dismantling the democratic institutions in the United States. He's dismantling American influence around the world. He clearly has good relationships with Mr. Putin and some of the other dictators around the world. So it's very, very challenging to try to guess what is in his mind. Some people would say that there may not be anything in his mind, but I wouldn't go that far. I would say that there's something that he's got going on. But I think that regardless of what Mr. Trump does, Canada must support Ukraine in a number of ways. Number one, it must work very strongly with like-minded nations, for example, in the EU, in the Baltic states and the Scandinavian states, to really, really stand as a bloc of nations who themselves will support Ukraine. So if the United States pulls away some of its military support, that void has to be taken up by other nations. The second thing is that Canada has to be very, very strong advocates for and supporters that any decisions about what Ukraine does are from Ukraine, not from Mr. Trump. It's Ukraine's decision what it will do, and the sovereignty of Ukraine is not negotiable. And we need to do everything that we can to support that sovereignty.
That's exactly what President Zelensky was saying, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. As a member of the National Security, Defense and Veterans Affairs Committee, if there is anything we should be afraid of in the Arctic?
We have the largest Arctic sea coast, period, and we are at least able to defend it. So Canada has just issued a new Arctic strategy. We currently have ships that are just been, in fact, I visited one of them last week that had just been built. They're not yet ready to move into the Arctic, but they're ice-capable ships that will help us bring defense capability into the Arctic. We are partners in NORAD. What that means with the changes in the American governance yet remains to be seen, but Canada plays an important role in NORAD. We have to do much more to build the infrastructure in the Arctic, to build the strength of the Arctic communities, as well as have a military presence. We need to be able to put sensors in the oceans so that we will know where the Russian and Chinese submarines are and when they go and where they come from. So we have lots and lots of work to do. So we have a whole new set of destroyers that will be built soon. One of the things that we need to do with those destroyers is to see whether or not they're missile defense capable, whether they can actually shoot down Russian missiles if the Russian missiles come. So that requires investment, and that requires spending, and that requires better military procurement. But I think we're starting to finally wake up. Previous governments have done nothing or very little in the Arctic. And the Senate had a report on this recently, and we need to move ahead vigorously in the Arctic.
With that initiative, would Scandinavian countries that you just mentioned be a part of that defense system of the Arctic?
Well, Denmark clearly through Greenland, and it's essential that Canada support Greenland's autonomy, just as the Scandinavians support our autonomy. It's no surprise that Mr. Trump wants to make Canada a 51st state, and he wants to take over Greenland because that would give the United States complete control over that area, not just for defense capabilities, but for the minerals and for the oil that's in that region. So we have to work much, much more closely with our allies in the Baltic countries and the Scandinavian countries and other countries that are part of the Arctic group of countries. There was a conference last week in Norway, for example, on issues related to the Arctic. And as the climate changes, the Northwest Passage becomes much more passageable. The other two major passages through the Arctic become much more passable. And so this is going to be a potential game changer for us.
I see. And the military support of Ukraine is the most important, but also because life goes on in Ukraine and we see it when we go there, business as usual and people continue their lives. So another way of supporting Ukraine is through Canadian investments. How Canadian businesses can help support and rebuild Ukraine?
Oh, you're absolutely right. I was just at the Canadian Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce Business Investment in Ukraine meetings. We have the Canada Ukraine Chamber of Commerce, which is actively pursuing developing business interests. The Business Council of Canada is advocating very strongly for further business development. The EDC in Canada can do more. Definitely can do more than it has done, and I would challenge them to do more to support business development in Ukraine. I mean, they have some really interesting things. For example, they have Ukrainian empowerment scholarships. So people who are here on the work visa, so the queried group can actually get a scholarship to do study of business in Canadian schools so that they can then apply those skills in Ukraine. But most people don't know about things like that. We have a really, really interesting program called FinDev, which was created to support developing countries. And I actually have spoken with a couple of ministers about why not repurpose FinDev and put Ukraine in there too, because it's a lot easier to work through FinDev than through EDC, in my opinion. So that I think that there are things that Canada could do. I think that there are things that Canada is doing. And I think that there are things that Canada could do better.
Mm-hmm. So what was the response for FinDev, or is it too early to talk about it?
It's too early to say, but let me just tell you that the response was not negative. And the response was, that's an interesting idea. We should look into it. So I'm encouraged by the response being not negative. And I'd be even more encouraged if the response was positive. But at least let's look into it. And I think that's good. And I got to give credit where credit is due. And Minister Sen has said he's going to look into it. And I think he'll do it.
Let's hope for the good outcome. And switching gears towards your family ties to Ukraine. So you came to Canada from Ukraine as a post-Second World War refugee, as a part of the family. Now you see the same story repeating itself less than 100 years later. What's your message for Ukrainian newcomers who fled the war and settled in Canada 2-3 years ago?
Я народився тут в Канаді. То батько і мама приїхали. They lost everything. They lost all their land. On my father's side, most of his family was killed, either by the Nazis or by the Russians. Бачите це? This is his Canadian Bank of Commerce. This is his first deposit of all the money that they were given when they Ikletu Bishroshi, the church gave them $500. Це все, що вони мали. Тільки $500 and the clothes on their back. When he died, he owned apartment buildings in Etobicoke. You know, his grandsons, mi brate, yeah, 2 doctors and a dentist. The Drugi grandson, hockey player for the Maple Leafs. Dziewczynka, wчителька. So everybody prospered. The thing here is that Canada has to create a pathway for permanent residency for the people that are here. The people that are here are mid-career. They have lots of incredible skill sets. I just met with a dozen of them last week in my office in Ottawa. There were entrepreneurs. There were professors. There were accountants. Very skilled people. We need those people. They are already working. They're already paying taxes. And so I have been having many, many discussions about how can Canada open up pathways to permanent residency. And there are some routes that we could use that we're not using. The other thing is that I'm very concerned that Ukrainians who have been offered an opportunity for permanent residency through the reunification, family reunification program, most of them have, of the people that have applied, they have not gone through the program. Many have not even heard about their applications. So this is a huge problem. And I can tell you, and I can tell your listeners, that I am having discussions, already have had discussions. I will be having further discussions with the minister. And I will now be writing publicly about some of the things that I think Canada has to do to allow access to permanent residency.
And thank you very much, Senator. It's been tremendous work that you've been doing, and I hope that our community and us Ukrainian Canadians will be able to join and support all your efforts. And we'll see you on February 23rd at the Parliament Hill on the rally in support of Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Дуже дякую, and thanks to all your listeners. And if I could just have one message, don't give up hope. And don't be afraid to push. Many of the people that I have spoken to are worried that if they speak out, there will be retaliation against them. That will not happen. This is not Russia. That will not happen to you. So by all means, speak up, make your voice heard.
Thank you.